good afternoon. I am Bonnie Garcia, Statewide Literacy Co-Director with the California Department of Education. This is part 2 of our Moving the Needle with High Impact Tutoring webinar. And actually the 9th webinar in our California 25-26 Literacy Informational Webinar Series. Let me move this forward here. The goal really of today's webinar, moving from part 1 to part 2 is to build on part 1, to be able to strengthen our district leaders' understanding of high impact tutoring models. So really focusing today on what are some models available. And so we're going to present 3 models today, and they will each be supported by research, evidence of effectiveness, and practical implementation lessons that help our district select the models that best align with their needs, their resources, and their context. So to get us started today, we're going to begin by briefly uplifting California's comprehensive approach to literacy and biliteracy and grounding our conversation in the state's shared vision and commitment. And then we're going to move in, and Daniela Soli, Education Programs Consultant in CDE's Expanded Learning Division, is going to give a quick recap of high impact tutoring and the research that was shared in part 1. So if you weren't with us in part 1, no worries. We're going to make sure that you are well oriented today. Jasmine Walker is going to join us thereafter. She's Director of Programming from the Outcomes-Based Contracting and is going to briefly share an approach and an opportunity related to high impact tutoring. We will then move into our panel discussion where we get to explore a range of tutoring models. And as we know, California is incredibly diverse, from rural to suburban to urban communities. So there's really no one size fits all model. And today's conversation really helps lift up what's possible and exploring some key considerations, different models, some practical approaches that can help districts and schools use this information to then determine what works best for their unique context. We do plan to leave a few minutes at the end for questions, followed by sharing additional resources and then closing out our time together. As questions come up during today's webinar, we want to ask you to put those in the Q&A. We will be able to, and we plan to address those at the end of today's webinar. So please drop them there and we will get to them. As a reminder, the examples that are provided today are intended to illustrate different high impact tutoring models and are not an endorsement of any specific provider. Now, before getting started today, I would like to acknowledge our State Superintendent, Mr. Tony Thurmond, who really has made reading by 3rd grade and beyond a key priority in California. A primary reason why we get to spend this afternoon together. So I want to just make sure that we take time to thank State Superintendent, Mr. Tony Thurmond. Under Superintendent Thurmond's leadership, California's Reading by 3rd Grade and Beyond initiative sets a clear goal: ensuring proficiency in literacy and biliteracy for students across California. Achieving this requires more than individual programs. It requires a comprehensive approach that's supported by coherent systems that work together at the state, district, and school site levels. As part of this statewide initiative, California is uplifting evidence-based strategies that accelerate learning, including high-impact tutoring, which fits within a strong, aligned literacy system. And in California, that comprehensive approach grounding these effective literacy systems was articulated in May 2025. And you can find this blurb, which I'm not going to ask you to read, but you can find it on our California Literacy webpage. But I do want to highlight a few very important points. One is that it builds on decades of research that include the science of learning, that include the science of reading and literacy and development that's responsive to California's culturally and linguistically diverse student population. It promotes sequenced literacy instruction, practice intervention, and meaningful application across ELA, ELD, and other content areas. Valuing developing knowledge and skills in ELA areas and use across all other disciplines. Making sure that this approach provides access to joyful, motivating, linguistically and culturally affirming, and developmentally appropriate literacy experiences that are integrated in foundational literacy instruction, oral language, vocabulary, comprehension, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, providing a comprehensive approach to ELD, one that uses integrated and designated ELD, that provides supplemental and intensified supports as needed, and make sure that we are monitoring progress and outcomes within this coherent system so we are always making improvements towards our goal. California's approach is comprised of recent significant investments that have strengthened California's literacy system and that fall under three big buckets: planning and development, best first instruction, tiered supports for learning. And these current and more recent initiatives that make up our comprehensive system include the Golden State Literacy Plan, the Comprehensive State Literacy Plan, the California's Literacy Roadmap, the ELA ELD follow-up adoption, the more recent from AB 1454 changes to the admin and specialist credentials, so we can ensure that our administrators and our leaders also not just know, but can support teachers in effective literacy instruction, literacy professional development, and screening for risk of reading difficulties, all our K through 2 students annually to ensure that we are providing early intervention as needed. And we're beginning to see progress in California. And I want to make a note that that's a non-exhaustive list. We have many more, but these are some that are more current and more recent. And because of all of these investments, last year between 24-25, we saw the largest year-to-year increase of a 1.8 percentage point gain, which is very encouraging, but it also highlights and reminds us that we have a lot of work ahead. And so the task now is to sustain this upward momentum so we can accelerate it by aligning and coordinating and being collaborative in our efforts around evidence-based practices like high impact tutoring. And with that, I have the honor of turning it over to my colleague, Daniela Sali, Education Programs Consultant with the California Department of Education, who's going to give us more information on high impact tutoring and the research. Daniela?
Thank you, Bonnie. I'm excited to share with you all today uplifting some research. This is a recap from part 1 of the webinar. So if you weren't here, you're able to access this information. We want to be sure that we have research-based practices. And so we want to look at what is high impact tutoring. And there's 3 key components that is punctuated for high impact tutoring as far as a definition. And with those 3 pieces, we are making sure that the tutoring is personalized for the learner, it's relationship based, and it is intensive. Those 3 key components is what helps us understand more about what makes it high impact tutoring. In California, we are also looking at a definition of what it looks like for us. And one of the key components is we want to make sure that we are pairing our students with the same human tutor across sessions for consistency, that those tutors are well trained and they are coached tutors. The dosage is a key part for the instruction. We want to be sure that it's occurring at least 3 times per week for an age-appropriate amount of time, usually a minimum of 30 minutes, and it would occur in small groups. So typically one-on-one would be optimal, but no greater than 1 to 4 for at least 10 weeks. That tutoring would occur during the school day. In California, we have the good fortune with our expanded learning program, so that could be an option as well. And there would also be appropriate measures to ensure that there is success and consistent attendance for the students. We would be utilizing student progress data to inform individualized instruction, and we want to ensure that those materials are, of course, high quality and align with that tier one learning experience. And we definitely want to make sure that we are engaging our families and our educators as partners in our high impact tutoring. For high impact tutoring, there are 7 key elements to make sure are being utilized. One is data use. We want to make sure that we are identifying the correct students to be participating in high impact tutoring, that instruction is focused and intentional, that it is skills based, that the tutor is consistent and well trained in the curriculum and the learning that needs to occur, and more importantly, that there is learning integration with the embedded within the school day. And if it's occurring during expanded learning time, that there is consistent communication with the school day as well. Part of the elements for high impact tutoring is equity, safety, and cohesion. With that equity, we want to ensure that students are having access, that those tutors are well trained in leading their sessions, and that they are reflecting in the communities in which the student lives. For safety, we have policies, training, and systems that are in place to ensure the safety of students and their data that is utilized. And again, a key component is cohesion, that the program is aligned and it's designed to work together, not in isolation from daily instruction. Regarding that learning integration, when it is embedded within the schools during the school day or immediately before or after school, there is a significantly higher likelihood of student attendance, which yields that consistency for learning. So that is a key piece for consistency. When you're taking a look at program design, consider recent research, which shares that opt-in tutoring models where the student or the family is opting in, it may not be reaching students who are furthest behind. There needs to be intentionality for which students are participating in the high impact tutoring. That coherence matters. We want tier one aligned tutoring, and that will yield greater outcomes. So we're looking at that effective first instruction, that tier one instruction, and that the tutoring is directly aligned to it. For virtual tutoring with a human tutor has been proven to be an effective approach for learning acceleration. And also shorter sessions, considering what would be developmentally appropriate for younger students, can also be highly effective. Sessions as low as 10 minutes for first graders, for example, still have great impact. Recent research also shares about implementation and impact, that student attendance actually improves on days when they have scheduled tutoring. So that is a great correlation for consistent learning. Tutoring during the school day definitely has a bigger impact than after school sessions. And again, that is due to that consistent attendance. Tutoring for English language learners has also been proven to be highly effective. Dosage is one of the key components for effectiveness. That is one of the pieces to look at for implementation, that it is consistent on a weekly basis. And when it comes to scaling out, that it can be difficult when it is not implemented with fidelity. Some evidence is showing growing adoption, pointing out there are 27 states with tutoring legislation or programs. 42% of schools are offering high impact tutoring. Again, revisit the definition of what makes it high impact tutoring. And 90% of schools offering that high impact tutoring believe it is effective. It is a research based approach. In addition, there is a large body of evidence that supports the effectiveness. There was 150 studies that consistently found those components, that it's personalized, relationship-based, and intensive instruction. That's what makes it high impact. It can lead to an additional 3 to 15 months of learning beyond what a student typically learns in a school year. This is applicable to both reading and math. So again, 3 to 15 months beyond a regular school year. Last, would like to share ongoing research regarding different tutoring models that are incorporating AI. For our in-person tutoring is definitely highly effective. It's that average 3 to 15 months of additional learning, and there is robust research showing that that is an effective approach. Another type of tutoring is virtual tutoring that has a human tutor. It is likely as effective as an in-person on average, and then also not enough evidence to date. So it's based on more limited research, but the research we've had thus far shows it can be effective. Another type of tutoring is human-led tutoring, utilizing technology or AI support for the tutor. Again, it is likely as effective as in-person on average, although there is not enough research to date. AI-led tutoring with human support or oversight, it's a small scale of research, but is showing promise, and that's a emerging research base. And then the final two, AI-led tutoring with human present and AI tutoring, there's not enough evidence to date, but there are studies underway. So as you can see, there are many different types of models that are available, and there is growing evidence regarding the effectiveness. With that, I would like to turn it over to Jasmine Walker from the Center for Outcomes-Based Contracting to speak to the OBC cohort.
Thanks, Daniela. Good afternoon, everyone. Just want to share an opportunity to support you all with moving the needle on academic achievement. California is joining Arkansas, Florida, and Texas in advancing outcomes-based contracting, which is a procurement lever we can pull to support identifying whether outcomes are being achieved, linking public funding to measurable student success. The Center for Outcomes-Based Contracting, in collaboration with state partners, will support up to 10 districts in launching high-impact tutoring programs with built-in accountability. Um, just one of your colleague districts, Santa Ana USD, they've been engaging in this work, and they started out with a pilot of 42 students and scaled in 1 year to 1,100 students, with 72% of those students meeting at least one of their contracted outcomes. And we'll share an impact story from Santa Ana later on. But participation in this cohort is at no cost to the district. So I'll say that again. Participation in the cohort, in order to learn how to engage in an outcomes-based contract, will be at no cost to the district. It includes virtual learning, expert coaching, and statewide collaboration. If you're interested in this opportunity, please join us this Thursday, March 23rd at 11 a.m. We're dropping the link to register for those office hours in the chat. During those office hours, you'll be able to ask questions about the opportunity. Also, if you're interested, the application is open. The deadline to apply is May 8th, and you'll be notified by May 15th whether your application has been accepted. We look forward to you joining us on Thursday to learn more about this opportunity.
Thank you, Jasmine. Appreciate that. And thank you, Daniela, for sharing the research, also effective approaches and opportunities for high impact tutoring. It really sets us up nicely for our upcoming panel discussion, where we get to explore three different models: virtual with a live teacher, virtual with AI and a live tutor, and virtual with AI. So helping us today helping us explore these models today, we're joined by three panelists who will help us dive a bit deeper. First, we have Jessica Slowersky, co-founder and CEO of Ignite Reading. And Jessica, if I said that your last name wrong, please correct me. Then we also have Shane Turpin, partnerships executive with Tutored by Teachers, And third, Malia Vela, Senior Vice President of Amira Learning. Jessica, Shane, and Malia, please come on screen. And thank you so much for being with us today and for your willingness to engage in what is going to be a robust conversation where I get to ask you as many questions as I can for the next 30 minutes so we can truly understand, just what are these different models, how do they work in practice, and what are some considerations for our districts. And I see Daniela came on really quick.
Hi, Bonnie. It's my understanding that we have a guest joining us, so perhaps introducing our guest before we get to our panel.
Yes. So Shane and Jessica, I'll call you guys right back up and Malia. But for now, I'd like to introduce and have our superintendent come on, our state superintendent, Mr. Tony Thurman, and say a few words. Hi, Superintendent.
Hi, Dr. Garcia. Great to see you there, and thank you for that great framing. And to all of the folks who are on from our Move the Needle cohort, thanks for being with us here today. You've got a great group of panelists that you're going to get to hear from. I've had a chance to see much of their work firsthand, and I can tell you it really, really makes a difference. So thank you for being a part of this conversation about high dose tutoring. We know that it makes all the difference for our students. Our state has invested billions in it, and hopefully we will do more. There are dollars proposed for this year's budget for more high dose tutoring. And I just want to thank all of you who continue to be a part of the conversation that we're having about how California gets to reading by third grade for all California students. High dose tutoring is a big part of that. We have written a 5-year plan for California. We want to make sure that California will do what other states have done and have a comprehensive approach to helping to support our students to boost their literacy, performance, and proficiency. High dose tutoring is part of that. Dyslexia screening and screening for other difficulties is part of that. Having evidence-based professional development, a heavy, heavy focus on the science of reading and phonics, having family engagement and making sure that our families are engaged and that they have books in multiple languages and that we focus on biliteracy here in California. And so we think that there are many, many great things. For those of you who are following and have any interest at all in being a part of what we're doing with our reading by third grade plan, our 5-year plan that we are rolling out, get in touch. We are building partnerships so that we can build scale and take this to scale across the state for the next few years. If you can remember my name, then you can remember how to get in touch with us and just send a note to tthurmond@cde.ca.gov if you want to be part of our effort. I've had a chance to visit with the folks at Ignite Reading and see their work in action in Oakland. It's incredibly impressive. It's an honor to welcome back Malia Vela, who as a one-time deputy superintendent here at the Department of Education and helped to drive a lot of our programs around literacy, around federal funding, and making sure that disadvantaged students get the best supports that they can. And welcome back. We know that Amira Learning has had incredible results. And obviously, teachers do everything we need and they do it the best. And so, Tutor by Teachers, we're so glad that you are here. So, welcome. Hello to everyone in the cohort. Thank you to everyone at the Department of Education for your great work. And without further ado, Dr. Garcia, I turn it back to you to help navigate the conversation with our wonderful panelists.
Thank you. And if I can see the emojis come up on the screen, just thanking Superintendent Thurmond for all of the support around ensuring that our students are reading by third grade and beyond. I see all of those, and that's exactly how we're all feeling. Thank you, Superintendent, for being on, for your words, and for kicking us off on our panel discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Hi, Jessica. Hi, Malia and Shane. Great to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so now we are going to engage in our discussion here, and I'll ask Shane to turn on his camera so we can get started. I want to start off, and I'll start off. I did this in alphabetical order when I first started, thinking about literacy ABC, right? So I'll start off with you. It's my last name, Jessica. If you can briefly describe what is your tutoring model and how it's structured, and then we'll move to Shane, and then we'll move to Malia.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. Nice to see you, Superintendent Thurmond, and I'm excited to be in this space with my fellow panelists and so many educators from across the state of California, which is also my home state. So, at Ignite Reading, we are on a journey to ensure that every single child has the right to learn to read on time. And yes, we want to see kids reading by third grade. And what we really want to see is kids learning to crack the code to be fluent automatic readers before the end of first grade. So there are four pillars to our approach at Ignite Reading. The first is that we are underpinned by high quality instructional materials. The second is that our core of virtual tutors are highly trained instructors. They are going through 100 hours of paid professional learning. They are learning how to teach a differentiated instruction curriculum rooted in the science of reading. And then there's ongoing performance management. So there is that implementation with fidelity that is really important. The third piece of this is that we are embedded during the school day. So you can imagine a literacy block, for example. After a teacher teaches the core lesson, kids are then moving into small groups with the teacher, and the kids who need this targeted one-on-one intervention are grabbing their devices, a pair of headphones, clicking a button, and on the other side of the screen is a real human, just like each of us is a real human. And that tutor is meeting with them at the same time every day, 15 minutes a day, one on one. And we're using baseline diagnostics to precisely target each child's skill gaps on that continuum of learning to read, and then teaching into those gaps, routinely progress monitoring, and then sharing that data back with school teams in the format of a monthly data meeting so that they can connect the dots instructionally and piggyback on the intervention.
Thank you, Jessica. So really hearing your four pillars and the structure as far as it being high dosage and the amount of minutes spent per each session with that continuous progress monitoring. So thank you for sharing that. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Shane. If you can tell us a little bit about your tutoring model and how it's structured in practice.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Shane with Tutored by Teachers. Thanks to Dr. Garcia for inviting me to be here today and to Superintendent Thurmond for jumping in as well. So at Tutored by Teachers, we provide standards aligned high dosage tutoring using live virtual instruction. As our name indicates, all of our teacher tutors are credentialed teachers with an average of 12 years classroom experience, and they're all experts in their content area. So we're able to provide customized tutoring programs to K-12 students before, during, and after the school day. And since we use these certified teachers, we can provide individualized small group instruction in both ELA and math, as well as support with student subgroups like bilingual or ELD, special ed, migratory, etc. So this flexibility really allows us to pinpoint those gaps and then provide the just right instruction to accelerate student learning and growth. We keep the student to teacher ratio at 4-to-1 or lower, and students keep that same teacher tutor throughout the entire program. So this allows students to build meaningful relationships and engage in student discourse, which we know is very important for their development with both their teacher, tutor, and their group. And so students are working with a skilled teacher who gets to know them, their needs, their learning styles, even their interests over time, and then can plan responsively from one session to the next. And our goal is really to provide these programs with limited lift on school personnel. You all are doing so much already that we don't want to add more to your plate. So students can use the school's preferred video conferencing platform and then log in quickly and efficiently. We take care of content, staffing, data tracking throughout the partnership, and we'll take whatever data the school wants to use for grouping, and we'll use that to determine the program effectiveness along with daily progress monitoring.
Thank you, Shane. And it's really nice to hear the teacher component and also the component where it allows the schools to use their curriculum as well as their data. Thank you for sharing. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Malia.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Dr. Garcia. Um, I'm with Amira Learning, and really our approach is to anchor on that core instruction that your teachers are providing. We know how important the quality core instruction is, and what we really offer is practice based off of that and an opportunity for students to read in a supported way with real-time intervention provided by our avatar. We really are human-centered AI. And so the way we think about it is that teacher's going to start our kiddos off by providing that core instruction. And like all aspects of life, it's the practice that's really going to turn that into progress. So the students log into Amira and they are provided with an opportunity to read connected text if that's where they're at in their zone of proximal development. And then they practice with Amira. If they're not ready for connected text, we have early reader skills, opportunities for them to work on letter sound, correspondence, things like that to get the building blocks there for them to move into connected text. They read about 5 to 10 minutes per session with Amira. She intervenes with Orton Gillingham style and science of reading interventions as the student's struggling. They tend to get about 80 to 90% accuracy. And then what's amazing is that Amira is going to make sure that they're confronted with opportunities to practice the places that they've been struggling and then take all of that data and provide it to our teachers so that they can get feedback in real time about what their students need. It really is scalable throughout the classroom. So the way to think about it is oftentimes we have 5 grade levels represented in a given classroom. So we integrate in station rotation, small group instruction time, even pull aside time, and as part of after school programs where the data goes directly back to the classroom teacher. So every practice session provides data to the teacher so that they know what each student knows and what they don't know, and they can group them into small groups and things like that. And then we connect into and loop into the high quality instructional materials that have been selected by the school, by the district, to make sure that those resources are available should the teacher want to provide supplemental lessons, those sorts of things to students. All in all, we see about 7 to 10 weeks of growth when students practice about 30 minutes per week with Amira. And we are working with students all over the country. And here in California, we do everything from that K2 screening and then roll into the intervention, which is our tutoring program.
Thank you, Malia. So many good things, hearing from all three, Jessica, Shane, and Malia, where, you are anchoring it in what the research says around just the right duration and frequency of time and the grouping and ensuring that it's tying back to and giving the data back to the teachers and educators so they can make informed decisions about what are some next steps for their students and making sure that we're closing those opportunity gaps. And so I'm going to move into the next question, and I'm going to start off with you, Shane. This has to do with evidence and research. And I know we're going to be sharing some of the evidence from each of our three speakers today in just a bit. But if you could tell us, what does current research suggest about the effectiveness of your model in improving student outcomes? For example, are there particular situations, student populations, or academic areas where your model shows the strongest results?
Yeah, thanks. So, as Daniela mentioned earlier, current research suggests that virtual high dosage tutoring works. And in fact, it may even be just as effective as in-person tutoring. There was a large randomized controlled trial across 8 school districts that found that virtual tutoring is just as effective as in person. So, through MDRC and a Johns Hopkins research study of virtual literacy tutoring, they found students reading at benchmark increased by over 200%, with similar results across students with IEPs, multilingual learners, and Black and Hispanic students. At our conception, we built our program based on Annenberg Institute's high dosage tutoring guidelines. And then through research-backed tutoring model offerings, we were then able to obtain the NSSA high dosage tutoring badge. And the strongest results consistently show up for students from low-income backgrounds in math and reading. On average, students can gain about a third of a grade level per year when given the proper dosage. And so over 3 years, that adds up to a full extra year of learning. And how impactful is that for students, especially those who are further behind? We've seen some amazing results with our work in California specifically, including double-digit gains at Scholarship Prep in Southern California. There, we had 110 students, third through eighth graders, engaged in 13 weeks of tutoring at 90 minutes per week. After those 13 weeks, tutored students outpaced their non-tutored peers by an average of 25 points in iReady, with third graders being the largest increase at 42 points higher than their non-tutored peers. And then we also saw double-digit gains in work with a large urban school district in Southern California, where we served 1,600 students across 49 campuses in both math and ELA, K-12. And our tutored by teacher participants outpaced the district in proficiency growth, and net increases in proficiency versus non-tutored peers were almost double. So very big gains there. Now, our other colleagues here on the panel will also tell you that dosage is everything, and delivery format matters a little bit less than whether kids are actually getting the dosage they need. And so virtual tutoring works, and honestly, it may be one of the most practical and economical ways to reach the students who need it the most.
Well, that is definitely some data that shows results. Thank you, Shane, for sharing. I'm going to turn it over to Malia. Malia, what about for you? What does the current research suggest?
Yeah, and I think all decisions that we make as administrators and as educators really do need to be focused on the research around impact. I'm not somebody who believes in tech solutionism. I think that we really need to make sure that the needle truly is moving with our kids when we make decisions around what we're putting in front of them and what we're having them interact with. We know time is limited in terms of instructional minutes. We want to maximize those. We've also partnered with different programs that have human tutors and things like that, so that you can have tiered and differentiated support. What we've seen with our impact studies, we've done many of them over the years, is that typically our students are growing, and whether that's in grades 3, 4, and 5, when we're thinking about moving the needle, even for students beyond third grade, especially for our students that have been impacted by COVID and things like that. We've seen growth in around 9 percentage points. We always look back at Hattie's zone of desired effects. And I think as you're making decisions around impact, that's really the place to center those decisions. Studies out of Utah, which requires by the state for all tech tools to send over data so that they can do an independent study, have shown that students that read with a mirror for 30 minutes per week do show an effect size within that zone of desired effects, similar to high dosage human tutoring. A recent study out of Louisiana, which was just linked in the chat, also saw that students who read at that 30 minutes a week, and again, as Shane mentioned, how we deliver that, whether that's after school or during different integrations during the school day, typically we saw students gaining between 7 to 10 weeks of growth throughout the school year. We also look at our subgroup data. It's really important. There was a recent study out of Texas and the Texas Education Agency to their state assessment. And what we saw was that Black, Hispanic, and at-risk students all grew significantly when using a mirror at 30 minutes per week. Black students in particular saw 13 percentage point gains on their STAR assessment when they used it dosage, and at-risk and economically disadvantaged students grew by between 8 to 10 percentage points. So all really promising data. Again, it's also going to anchor around that quality core instruction.
Thank you, Malia. And I'm hearing really the dosage and the zone of proximal development and zone of desired effects, and really using that to drive where's going to be my impact in your studies as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jessica. What about for you? What is the current research suggesting?
Thanks so much, Bonnie. It is really wonderful to be talking about outcomes. That is so essential. And as a lifelong educator who's running a company that's very mission driven, that's the whole point of what we are doing. So kudos to my fellow panelists. We've had several strong studies at Ignite Reading, and our most recent study is the second year of a longitudinal study at scale across 13 school districts in partnership with Johns Hopkins University. And it was incredible to see the growth that kids were making 2 years in a row. In the second year in particular, what we saw was that kids started on average at about 6% on benchmark per dibbles. And by the end of the school year, as a result of the intervention, that number had moved to 48% of kids on benchmark. So that is an 8x increase in the number of kids on benchmark, which is huge growth. If you imagine being a school leader, what that kind of increase means for your literacy ecosystem. Also meaningful was that the number of students in intensive, so those kiddos in the red who are the furthest behind, decreased from 70% to 31%. And when we then looked underneath the hood to understand, well, what's going on with individual groups of kids? Are all kids achieving? Because we care a lot about equity. We found that all students across every group grew an additional 5 months, and that included students who were multilingual learners and students with IEPs, groups of kids who historically aren't moving in the way that we would want as educators. And when you look at data like this, what it tells us is that the problem is not the kids. The kids can learn to read, the kids will learn to read. The issue is one of access and ensuring that they have the targeted support that they need, which is the power of high impact, high dosage tutoring. And the last thing that I'll share from this study that gives me so much hope is because it was the second year of a longitudinal study, we wanted to understand the durability of the intervention. So for the kids who had had Ignite Reading the first year, how were they doing the second year now that they weren't receiving the intervention? And what was so awesome to see was that 85% of the students who made it to benchmark in year one were still on benchmark at the end of the second year, absent further intervention. So, when we think about what it means to intervene on time and provide kids with the targeted support they need, this is not. Um, it's not a dream anymore to imagine our state having all kids learning to read on time. There is an actual path to making this happen and those gains sticking.
Thank you, Jessica. And it's so true. We have to be thinking about impact first. If we're, selecting programs and spending very precious time and funding on our students, we have to make sure that there's research that supports what we're implementing and what we're selecting. So I'm gonna turn it back over to, actually, I'll turn it to you, Malia. And just thinking about time, I'm gonna kind of put some questions together here, right? And thinking about implementation and continuous improvement, how do districts or programs typically integrate such a tutoring model, like the model that you have, into a school day or a schedule? And how do they monitor the progress, and what might be some challenges or just some key considerations when they're thinking about such a program and such a model?
Yeah, obviously, it's going to be different implementations depending on if you're looking at early education versus looking at intermediate. You've got the Bell schedule to consider for intermediate. We are developmentally and psychometrically validated for TK through grade 8, and we work with students also in high school in places like Detroit Public Schools and Chicago Public Schools, where students, maybe they're newcomers or other students are coming in later. So we also take into account what the schedule looks like in a high school implementation. Generally speaking, we usually see integration as part for early ed as part of station rotation or practice time, and then move into win blocks and things like that. So, what I need blocks for students in later grades, things like that, when they're having an opportunity or to catch up or to get some support where they would use a different supplemental tool, they could log in and use Amira. We also see it used during transition times. So as students are transitioning after a lesson or before a lesson, or even at the start or end of the school day, they'll log in and use. And that's because they're reading about one story at a time or one chapter at a time. For our students in later grades, we get into comprehension dialogue and conversation. We're a tool that requires our students to read aloud. So rather than students sitting, let's say in a station rotation or guided reading practice, things like that with a book, and then sitting there silently following along or reading, but reading without feedback, our program requires the students to read out loud so that there is a record for the teacher and that the student can get that immediate feedback in real time. As we think more and more about how to make our strategies more coherent across the board, and I saw there were questions about how do you integrate when you have different learning, different instructional methods in place. Oftentimes, we find that one place that students are really lacking is getting supported reading time and getting fluency practice. And so, this is where we can step in and provide that personalization so that every student is getting what they need in real time. And what I mean is, as you see a classroom that might span 5 grade levels in terms of student ability, we often we do move within their zone of proximal development so that you can have one student sitting there working on letter sound correspondence activities while another student is engaged in a comprehension dialogue. And then all of that data flows back to an easy to follow report for the teacher that tracks both criterion reference scoring, meaning to state standards and where students are falling on that, as well as to overall, national norms, things like that, to give the teacher kind of a gut check in terms of where the student is, and then tracking overall usage over time.
Thank you, Malia. Jessica, what about with your program? What are some things that how do districts typically integrate it? What might be some key challenges, and how are students monitored their progress?
Great question. So the rubber hits the road with implementation, and we sweat how we implement this program with our partners because every single instructional second matters when you are working to urgently close gaps and accelerate kids forward. The thing about tutoring is that it is not a silver bullet. There are no silver bullets in education. Those of us who have been in the classroom, school leaders, system leaders, we deeply understand this. So, one of the most important things, if you want to maximize outcomes for kids, is that you are taking steps within your own literacy ecosystem to ensure that you are implementing high quality instructional materials with fidelity, that teachers are getting coached and supported, that you are using strong assessment practices, right? Those things are table stakes. And at the same time, we often implement in places where those things may not be perfectly happening, and kids still need to have a foundational reading skills safety net. So when you can have the safety net, even in those conditions, you're going to get even stronger outcomes. But you don't have to have the most perfect conditions to still have a safety net for kids. And we find that oftentimes, uh, the way that the program is implemented, the way that we're partnering with schools around scheduling during times of day where you're not going to have to worry that a late school bus is going to then mean that kids are going to miss tutoring is really important. So from the outset, there's a very intentional planning and onboarding process to help mitigate the kinds of challenges that can happen downstream around scheduling or attendance. We work with partners to share best practices around family engagement, family communication. We hear stories oftentimes about kids whose attendance was not strong prior to the program, but because they're so invested in this human who is meeting with them every single day and who knows that they just lost a tooth or that they have a new pet turtle and is teaching them to read, which feels really good, they're then saying to their parents, I can't miss school today. So that's one of the really positive perks of implementing these programs is that attendance boost. And in terms of the data, so screeners are really important tools. Screeners are the first step that school systems take to understand who is at risk. They are one piece of the puzzle, but they don't give you the full understanding of what's going on with that child as a learner. So we do deep diagnostics during the first week of our program to understand exactly where that child is on the continuum of learning to read so that we can precisely pinpoint instruction. And then, because we are teaching one-on-one, we have the luxury of getting to know our kids intimately as learners. And then we use that information to continue to motivate them, teach them, move them with urgency and care. But then we're sharing that information back with our partners in real time. As a former first grade teacher, I did not have the ability to deeply know every single nuance of every single one of my kids' needs as a learner. But when we can share this information back with teachers as well as targeted resources for them to piggyback on our intervention, well, now we're amplifying the number of at-bats kids can have and the rate at which we can accelerate closing their gaps.
Thank you, Jessica. And Shane, I'm assuming that there might be a lot of what was shared that also pertains to your program. Is there anything additional to add? And I am looking at the clock at 1:52. I should have made this an hour and a half. But if you could, is there add anything on? And then I'm gonna ask you guys one quick question and then we're gonna close out.
Yeah, I think, the importance is to us is really to be flexible and to work closely with school and district leaders to schedule during the school day, during times that work best for them. Additionally, just mitigating for some of those challenges that come up, whether it be staffing and when a tutor doesn't show up, that not only do you miss a session, but the kids also don't get the tutoring and they start to lose trust. So we put things in place to make sure that we are prepared for when those implementation challenges come up. And like they said, it's all about building trust with the schools and the districts and delivering on what we say we're going to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Shane. And with that, I have one last question to ask all of you. 30 seconds each. What's one insight that you hope that district leaders take away with them today about selecting the model that works best for their context? And I'm going to start with Shane.
Yeah, thanks. So I would say the most important thing to walk away with is that the right model is the one that your teachers and your principals will actually trust and use. There's a lot of pressure right now to show results fast, and that can push districts towards solutions that look great on paper, but may not necessarily fit the real conditions on the ground. The tutoring model that works is the one that fits your students, your data systems, your bell schedule, your teachers' bandwidth. My honest advice is ask the hard questions during the selection process, not just what does your data show, but how does this actually look in a school like mine? Talk to principals that have used it, ask what broke down and how the vendor responded. And I'd say the same thing whether you're talking to us or anyone else on this panel today. The goal isn't really to sell you a program, it's to find the right fit for students so that they actually get what they need. And when that match isn't right, everyone loses, especially the kids. So go in with clarity about what your context actually demands and find a partner who's honest about whether they can meet it.
Thank you. And I want to just like snap my fingers at that. Thank you, Shane. And we welcome emojis. So if anybody wants to do any reactions, we love those. Malia, what about you?
I'm going to speak from a place of also being a board member for outcomes-based contracting, but I think, really looking at those outcomes, not just in the past and in different research settings, but demanding them moving forward and understanding your power as a decision maker with the pocket of the purse to demand outcomes and to set those goals from the outset so that everyone's working with a shared understanding of implementation and expectations. And I would also say that the other side of it is to make sure that as you're thinking about what you're implementing and what you're doing, to not ignore the edge cases. I'm a mom of two young kids in California public schools. I've worked and served in this state, and I think we also need to think about not just our kids who may be screened for risk, but thinking about all of those edge cases to make sure that we're serving all students. And so with looking at your budgets, really making decisions to understand how do you serve all students in an equitable way, and then making sure that you are doing more for the students who maybe are faced with a larger invisible backpack and need that support.
Thank you, Malia. I feel like another one of these is thank you for that. Jessica.
My co-panelists are so wise, and I agree with everything both Shane and Malia have said. The thing that I would urge districts to think about is how do you have a multi-pronged approach to ensuring that all of your kids are going to learn to read? So right now, you may have lots of kids in grades 3 and above who are not proficient readers, and that's a problem. That's a crisis. And you have kids sitting in first grade right now who your data may also be showing are not on track to be proficient readers. So, how do you design in a way that is going to ensure that your kids learn to read on time? How do you intervene and remediate for the kids who missed that opportunity? And then how do you strategically build a 3-year plan such that the future of your school system looks like year over year over year, at least 85% of your first graders making it to benchmark before they even leave first grade? Imagine if that were the state of early literacy in California or our nation.
Such great insights, such great considerations, and thoughts for district leaders to walk away with as they are thinking about selecting or refining their high impact tutoring programs. Thank you for being with us today. And I know that were a number of questions in the chat. I'm going to bring on my colleague, Daniela Solly. We have 2 minutes. I believe she's going to answer one question. And we'll just make a note that there's a lot of resources in the slides that were shared, so you can take a look at that. Now, without further ado, I turn it over to Daniela, and thank you again, Jessica, Malia, and Shane.
Thank you, Bonnie. We had a few remaining questions that were left, and they're more of a local decision type of questions. So if you have concerns about what's happening during the instructional day or how you can integrate high impact tutoring, those are local level decisions. I would be connecting with your leaders within maybe your multi-tiered system of support or your leadership at this local level, and there's a lot of funding that's available to support high impact tutoring. In the slides for today, I just want to point out there is some information regarding funding. There's also additional information related to research. We work closely with the National Student Support Accelerator. They have a plethora of resources on their website, including a district playbook. They have standards, there are toolkits, and there's additional research that is available for reference. So really encourage you to check those out. If you're utilizing expanded learning, those ELOP resources, that's also a funding resource and a time to be able to utilize for that. And I will turn it back over to Bonnie. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And as Superintendent mentioned, you can email him directly. You can also email myself and my co-director, Nancy Brennelson, at our emails here or at statewide-literacy-campaign.cda.ca.gov. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to touching base with everyone again. Have a great day.